You're listening to the 47th broadcast of TBR Radio's The TBR History Hour, with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Edward DeVries. On today's show, Dr. Ed makes a call to London to speak with Lady Michelle Renouf, the British socialite and a noble lady who was arrested back in 2018 for politically incorrect speech at a World War II memorial in Germany. All charges were recently dropped against Lady Michelle and she has been freed and has returned to London.
Michelle, how are you today?
Very well.
So how does it feel not to be rotting in a German prison right now?
It feels wonderful because I have such people as Tom Goodrich, who wrote the Hellstorm, a great pal of mine, and one that an American author who should be very much the Americans should be very grateful for having such a marvelous author. And he wrote to me recently saying, very enthusiastically, to quote him, "You have given Germany a great victory, perhaps the greatest in 75 years. So I think if people of his caliber see things like that, I must say I'm enormously grateful, actually, to my German attorney, Wolfram Narat, who achieved such what he said, a nearly sensational result. Quite a first in legal terms there. And I'm very happy to be able to have the chance with you to describe exactly what he achieved there in these last few weeks.
So why did you go to Germany to begin with? In other words, the events that led up to your arrest, what were you doing there and why did they arrest you?
Well, I had made a documentary film, The Dresden Holocaust, and an apology, subtitled An Apology to Germany is Due. I'd made that in 2012 in England, but I'd never actually been to Dresden to a commemoration. So a friend of mine was going, and I said, well, I'd like to come along. And I wasn't invited to speak. I don't speak German. And as it happens at that time, the person who was organizing it, he and I were not on particularly good terms on another matter altogether. So I wouldn't have expected him to invite me in the first place. But I knew of course, he would be happy enough to have me there. In fact, because of what he had spoken, German, because of what he had spoken himself, he was allowed to organize the commemoration, but he was forbidden by law to speak at it. So that's just the background to the organizer. And so, before just as it was beginning, my friend and I were just standing there waiting for it to begin, and were speaking obviously in English. And a German woman said to us, overhearing us, she said, "You British have no right to be here." And people standing around who understood what she said were trying to sort of placate the situation. But I said, I completely understand why she says that, and I'm in great sympathy with her. And because there was a little bit of interest in what was being said there, the organizer said, well, I think you're going to have to take the microphone and speak to the crowd. So it was entirely impromptu that I did take the invitation to speak to the crowd, and in a sort of way, sort of addressed her concerns to everybody. And so I tried to explain to this woman how I understood that we were all standing on what really is hallowed ground. After all, the British and Allied wartime policy was deliberately to target German civilians, and they had pre-planned this. They had even rehearsed it in created atmospheric situations in America to see scientifically how they could best cause people to be burnt alive. This is the wickedness is now what is called now moral bombing of that is the real story behind what Tom Goodrich calls a hellstorm, because the people were so, the pavements where we were standing 70 years ago had been so heated by the intense fire of this orchestrated bombing that their feet stuck to the ground, and they were literally burnt alive while stuck to that ground. So I was acutely aware of how this woman felt. And so I said it's very important, as it happens, that British people are able to tell you the facts that are in the British archive from the War Ministry, in which it is not well known at all about how deliberately the targeting was of civilians, and in 60 German towns and cities, not just Dresden. And I was pointing out that it wasn't simply the commemoration of what terrible things had happened, what terrible criminality had happened, because soldiers are not allowed to attack civilians. And this was not collateral damage, this was a plan. I said, it's not simply to commemorate the dreadful atrocities that happened here, but to talk about the significance of it today. Because ever since the Nuremberg trials, when the Allies got away with war crimes at the same time as being judge and prosecutor on the Germans, all wars ever since have deliberately targeted civilians because they got away with this so-called moral bombing in Dresden and 60 other German towns and cities. And that was the beginning of my little 10-minute speech. And then I went on to talk about something that is very rarely brought up, but I think it's fundamental to the Hollywood version of history that we're constantly being shown. You watch a film and you have the idea that the Jewish civilians were interned in camps for no other reason than the Germans didn't like them. Well, this is not the case, actually. It is, as I said, in all wars, when your government goes to war on another country, you may not want to be part of it. But that's not how it goes. You become the British or the Americans or the French or whatever it is. And it is the same with world Jewry. If your leaders of world Jewry, and certainly at the time they were, working with the British, and they say themselves, and we also have it in the proof in the documents, that they were working with the British to undermine the Germans. If you have what is called fifth columnists working in your country, now not all of the Jews in Germany and so on would have been fifth columnists any more than all the British were fifth columnists if they were in Germany. But that's not how it is in war. In war, you all become the enemy if your country or your world federation has declared your people all part of it. And so it was Chaim Weizmann, who was then head of the Jewry at that time, who he himself indicted all of Jewry because of his statements at the time in 1933 and so on. And of course, the thing is that the simple fact that Jewish civilians were interned in camps is today regarded as a war crime and part of a genocide, regardless of what did or did not happen in the camps themselves. That was what I was trying to say. And of course, knowing that it's illegal in Germany to debate any matters about what did or did not happen in the camps, I certainly didn't speak about that. My little impromptu was concerned with Germans and how this impacted this Chaim Weizmann and their policy of indicting all their people, whether they were party to it or wanted to be party to it or even knew about it. This was something that I think is lacking in the public perception of why Jews were interned into concentration camps during the war. A normal thing that happened in all other countries. Certainly it happened in America, certainly it happened in England, it happened in almost all countries. Naturally, you have to put aside people who may work for the enemy. That's not to say they do, but they may. And that was the reason why Germany put its Jews into concentration camps, because of Chaim Weizmann and the Jewish leadership who indicted them. And that, of course, is, I said, was not exceptionally cruel of the Germans to have done so. And the moment I said that, the police and the secret service people within the crowd. There were about 300 people at the commemoration. There were about 300 Antifa screaming and yelling and making a noise, and there were hundreds of police at this commemoration. This was in 2018, mind you. And of course, I saw the microphone was immediately moved, and my poor spontaneous translator whispered to me, "I cannot translate that. It is 130. That's paragraph 130. That's called Volksverhetzung, which is public incitement, and it's something that one can be given a very long sentence for, at least 5 years." So that was the first crime, as it were, of stating a fact, that has actually been stated. Proof has been made available to us from the horse's mouth, actually, in terms of their boasting about their wishing to create a Judaic war on Germans, all Germans, just as Churchill did. He said he wanted to eliminate what he called the malignant Hun. So there was a great deal of hatred from a lot of these sort of leaders, hatred of the Germans themselves, the people, not simply the regime. There's a great deal of jealousy involved, I believe, and that was one of the aspects in my DVD that I tried to bring out, that Britain was the first in the Industrial Revolution, and later on the Germans took over. But this idea of creating jealousies among the nations and playing them off is something that we know from Max Nordau and the other leading Zionist founder, Theodor Herzl, that this is how they operate in international waters, as it were, in international diplomacy. They try to create jealousies and play off the empires. And that, I think, is how we had World War I and World War II, because of this backstage playing off the envy and jealousy, instead of the white cousins congratulating each other as they should do. And I think this is very much relevant, more so today than ever, that we are now being, there is this desire to create what is known as the clash of civilization, the clash of the races. On the one hand, they're saying there are no races. On the other hand, they're saying that we must respect Black Lives Matter, quite as if white lives don't matter. And so the other aspect of my speech was that on the wall that was opposite the cafe where I was waiting with my friend before we joined the commemoration, I saw in huge 1-foot letters on a fence painted in English, in German, this we're in Dresden, in English, "Good night, white pride." And I found that very annoying. So I mentioned that as well in my speech, because I said, I quoted Joe Sobran, I think I did on one of your programs before, Dr. Ed, where I said that Joe Sobran had, the late great Joe Sobran, your American author, he had said, it's interesting to note that it's not white races who are mass migrating to colored countries. It is colored people mass migrating to white countries, which must prove that white people have benefited the world, because why would it be that people wish to be among us? And incidentally, it's now illegal in England, virtually. It's certainly you'd lose your job if you call people coloured now. it's one can't keep up with the what is politically correct anymore.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
And so what was going through your mind then? You know, the microphone's being taken away from you. I assume the police were coming in on you. You know, you're being arrested now at this point. What's going through your mind?
Well, I had finished the 10 minutes that I was speaking there, and right away, to my astonishment, and to everybody else's, of course, the microphone was taken from me, and I was arrested by the police. The commemoration was instantly closed down, despite the fact that I pleaded that I was not one of the speakers, that I was simply out of the crowd, and that they shouldn't be closing it down. But the wonderful thing was that Alfred Schaefer, who's now in prison, as our listeners may well know, who was an extremely able deconditioner of people's brainwashing, as you might want to say. He was there at that time, and he said that he was so happy that the commemoration the event had been closed down when I was holding the microphone, because it brought the international press interest to the commemoration itself, which it did. I mean, the Independent, the very big newspaper in Britain, the Independent and the Daily Mail, they did put very big articles about this, my being arrested there, and my being charged with this Volksverhetzung. I spent 9 hours with the police, who, interrogating me and taking fingerprints and the usual sort of things. And I made a statement, and I agreed that I would come back for the trial, which I would certainly wished to do, and that's what happened on the day. But it was wonderful how all the speakers who after me weren't able to speak were all but one in agreement that this was the best thing that had happened, and that Alfred said that there was nothing that anybody else would have said that would have been more fitting than what I had said, and he very, very generously said so. And of course now poor Alfred is now in prison himself for 3 years, but not from that. It was subsequently, well, he was imprisoned actually for putting his right arm up in a Roman salute. You can be imprisoned if you put your arm up, the wrong arm. As he said, I was only showing how high my dog can jump, but
Yeah.
but what is the laws of Germany are, even two ex-constitutional judges, Hassemer and Hoffman-Rehn, in 2008, I put it in one of my videos, my documentaries at the time, they said that they considered that the Holocaust denial law should be repealed, that people should be able to speak of historical events without persecution, certainly because it isn't a crime to speak, and certainly not in a civil manner. Look what has happened to my dear friend Ursula Haverbeck, a woman now in her 92nd year. And as it happens, when I was arrested, the first question that my arresting officer asked me was, did I know Haverbeck? And I said with great pride that she was a personal friend, that I regarded her as the epitome of all that a German woman could be. She was eloquent, elegant, all of the four classical virtues are embodied in Ursula Haverbeck. And she is now, tomorrow, oh no, is it today actually? Today is Tuesday, yes, today she was released temporarily out of prison for a few days last week, and now today she was due back in court. And the idea that you could put a civil speaking, eloquent woman with no animosity, no nastiness, nothing about this woman is ugly or unattractive. She asks normal questions, forensic questions about a so-called crime, and where are the bodies, where are the forensic proofs, where are the autopsies, where are these things that prove that a crime took place, and so on. And for this, just asking civil questions in a civil manner, she has been imprisoned, and she is a great a woman that I hugely respect, and cannot imagine anybody in their 92nd year having this fantastic energy that she has. She is really a woman for the world to admire, and I certainly do.
Well, you've mentioned Ursula and you've mentioned Alfred. Alfred's sister, working with her?
A very good friend, actually. She, as it happens, she and her brother came to me at Christmas in Germany to celebrate. I made a little film about her, and subsequently, her and Joe Felici, the Italian tenor, called The Good Comrade. She came to my place, and then it was shortly after that she went to Munich with her brother to attend the Sylvia Stoltz's trial, the attorney Sylvia Stoltz, the one who I heard the judge in Mannheim said that she was defending her revisionist clients too well, Dr. Ed, get that, too well. She was defending her clients too well, and therefore would be prosecuted herself. The very idea that your attorney would not defend you too well would be cause for, in every other country in the world, to prosecute your attorney for failing to defend you too well. But in Germany, the laws are such that anything that has to do with National Socialism is forbidden. Anything at all. so that or anything that queries the Holocaust, the Holocaust, the trademark Holocaust. And in my speech, of course, I had said that there was only one Holocaust over Europe in the 1940s, and that was on the German civilians, because a Holocaust is a burning alive. It's not a cremation, it is a burning alive. And that was one of my great crimes, of course. But just getting back to Monica, so she was simply attending the attorney Sylvia Stoltz's trial. And suddenly the court was adjourned, and Monica was arrested from the public gallery of the courtroom, having done nothing at all. She was just sitting there like a normal person does to hear a trial proceedings, and she was put into prison and charged with the same as I, Volksverhetzung. And she was imprisoned for 10 months because she had made a film. Unfortunately, she had made it on German soil with her brother, called "Sorry, Mom, I was wrong about the Holocaust," and it was for this that they arrested her, because you are simply not allowed to query any of the tenets of Holocaustianity. And I do say Holocaustianity, Dr. Ed, because as I try to remind everybody each time I do any recording at all, of the international guidelines for teaching about the Holocaust in schools, because it says on page 11, and I'm quoting this, it says, "Care should be taken not to give a platform for deniers," that of course is skeptics, "or seek to disprove their position through normal historical debate and rational argument," end quote. If that isn't proof that you're teaching a section of history as if a religion, not as objective history, as objective as one can be in historical research and sources, it's clear that this is a section of history that is to be taught as a religion, as Holocaustianity. It's reasonable to call it Holocaustianity because you cannot query the eyewitnesses, or any of these accounts, save, of course, on that one groundbreaking, stunning victory that Ernst Zundel and Professor Robert Forisson and Doug Christie had in Canada in 1985 and 1988. When they did have, for the first and last time, on the witness, the doyen of Holocaust historians, Dr. Raoul Hilberg, cross-examined and said and admitted that there was no proof of this order of Adolf Hitler. And then that he claimed there was. He had to admit that he had no proof, and there was no proof of this. And then, of course, guided by the late great Professor Robert Forisson, Doug Christie also cross-examined their key eyewitness to the alleged mass murder weapon. And this chap admitted that he had, on the stand, under oath, that he had used poetic license in his testimony, i.e. he had lied. And so this, of course, was groundbreaking, but has never been able to be repeated. And now, of course, we have these laws, particularly in across Europe, where you have to accept the new definition of anti-Semitism, which means that you may not criticize any Jew about anything at all. It's I mean, you can talk about the British or the English or the French or the this or that, but you cannot talk about the Jews. And even though we all know that when you talk about the British, you're not talking about everyone. You're not talking, when you say about the Americans, you're not talking about every single one of them. You're talking about the ones that you are particularly referring to. But this is not permitted anymore. This is this kind of tyranny in our freedom of speech is breathtaking in its. And look what's happening now to Corbyn, the Labour leader in England. He's absolutely being persecuted simply because he stuck up for the rights of the Palestinians. And this is a crime, because this is considered to be an insult to Israel. We have very strange things that we are permitting without standing up, and because for the last 20 years I have been following these trials across Europe and Canada too, when Ernst Zundel was alive, I really had to stand up myself when invited to say something in the defense of what the Barnes Review talks about, bringing history into accord with the facts.
Extra, read all about it. If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it. You mentioned attorneys in Germany being prosecuted for daring to actually provide a legal defense for their clients. Were you ever afraid that your own attorney was working against you, or that he would fail to provide you with a proper defense?
Never, because this attorney is the one who represents Ursula Haberbeck, Monica Schäfer, and many others. And his name is Walter Amnarat, and he is able. In my case, he did an exceptionally brilliant job, and of course he had. It was somewhat different task with me, because I wasn't German and didn't speak German, and so he was, as I've said in the recording that we've made of his explanation for the circumstance surrounding my arrest and my trial. I've explained that the brilliance of Narat was that he was able to see the sort of potential of his client. And in my case, he saw the potential that was probably not, probably was easier for him to see in me than perhaps a lot of other people, because of the curious sort of ingredients, as it were, of my life and associations, really, and that was just something that he was able to bring out in the last few days before my trial was on the 16th of October. It was clear that the German authorities had been very concerned about bringing me to trial, because just my arrest brought international attention to it in major newspapers and around the world, so that whilst the newspapers sort of write in a way that sort of suits their bosses, nevertheless they sometimes have to quote something that the person who's being persecuted said. And so this is how the public are able to find out one or two things that they wouldn't normally access to. And this was something that the court were very afraid of. That again, because of my sort of celebrity, that's always been quite a lot of it perfectly silly celebrity to do with my being a beauty queen, in my youth, and of course a child model and a child performer. I was a sort of Australia's Shirley Temple, singing and tap dancing on radio and that sort of thing. And throughout my life, I've done a lot of charity work, either performing, as I say, as a child for charities, or and later on doing a lot of charity work, fundraising for major charities and so on, chairing events and so on. So he, first of all, pointed out to the court and prosecutor that I was what he called a charity lady, that I'd been a person who had been involved in charities since childhood. That my intention when I took the microphone or accepted the microphone was, again, in a charitable, with a charitable disposition, not a hate-filled disposition. And so he was able to bring out that I was not some sort of foul-mouthed, malicious person, intending to sort of, draw attention to myself, or for no better reason than ego and such things of that sort, or trying to sort of break the law. I wasn't trying to break the law. I was trying to express sympathy to the German people for what had happened in consequence of our dreadful leadership in World War II. And so he also then brought out other aspects of my background, that my late husband had been a prisoner of war in Germany. Sir Francis Renouf was Captain Renouf at age around 20 when he was captured among the other New Zealanders in Bavaria during the war and put into an officers' camp for the duration of the war. And there he learned German through one of the prison guards who taught him to speak German through Schiller's poetry. Had I been before the court, I would have brought out, or certainly with the press, I would have brought out whether I would have the luck of finding such a well-versed prison guard nowadays in Germany who could teach me through Schiller, or had even heard of Schiller's poetry. And so Sir Francis loved the Germans because of the treatment that he received and so on. Although he didn't believe in National Socialism, he was nevertheless had good experience of being with the Germans when he was in captivity. And after the war, he worked with Hermann Arps, who was the head of the Deutsche Bank, to help reconstruct Germany's banking system after the war. And for that, the Germans, post-war Germany, the Federal Republic, they awarded him the highest order for a foreigner, called the Verdienstkreuz, and the Queen, the British Queen, knighted him also for the work that he did on reconstructing Germany's banking system after the war. And I think, as I said to you last year when we did our program last year, Dr. Ed, that had I known about such matters, I probably would have regarded what he did in deconstructing Germany's national socialist escape from international monetary system as a matrimonial impediment. But I didn't know about such things at the time. However, it would have been an extremely embarrassing thing for the Germans to put on trial a person whose husband had been awarded the Verdienstkreuz by post-war, whose husband had been a prisoner of war, whose matrimonial home was the former home of Neville Chamberlain, the wartime prime minister, who was deeply against the terror bombing, And so I'm very proud to tell you that our matrimonial home was the former home of Neville Chamberlain, a person who really should have gotten the Peace Prize for his desire to prevent an intergentile war. And he saw the criminality of the aerial bombing, the new way of conducting war, which would not only make civilians collateral damage, it would make them the targets. So a lot of these aspects would have been part of what NARAT would have presented to the prosecution and the court. But for the last 2 years, they were very determined that they would put me on trial, regardless of his arguments. But something must have happened behind the scenes, because they had a change of heart. They suddenly got cold feet, because he had pointed out to them that in putting a British citizen on trial was putting a member of the Allies on trial, because Germany has not its own sovereignty since the war. It is still literally without a peace, signed peace. That it is still at war, as it were, with the Allies, and consequently, it is still under the rule of the Allies. And as Narat points out in the part 2 of my little film that I've made about him, which you can view if our listeners want to go to what's it called? Blog model. Let me see where it's written somewhere here. I think it's Model on Trial. No, it's called modeltrial.blogspot.com. And there you'll be able to find those two little films that Narat gave the interviews, one in German and one in English, in which he talks about the background to my arrest and explains this extraordinary reversal of the Germans to decide against last minute, 2 days before I was to stand trial, and I was there. I didn't even come back to England between times for fear that perhaps I might be caught up with some quarantine or something, wouldn't be able to get back for the trial. I was very determined that I would be there at that trial.
So you were living in Germany at the time just to make sure that you could attend the trial?
Absolutely, yes. You see, I have a property in Germany. I think I've explained that in last year's broadcast I did with you, that I bought about 10 years ago or so. The German attorney Manfred Roeder really pressed me for 2 years until finally I did buy his property there, because it's an historic property. You see, it's the German press call it the Reichstag, the Reichshof, because Adolf Hitler handed the baton, as it were, to Grand Admiral Dönitz, as history knows, and then Grand Admiral Dönitz handed it to Manfred Roeder, and so Manfred Roeder's house is a sort of historic house from the point of view of that connection with that history, and so the German press are always writing articles about me without any interview at all, in which they describe it as the Reichshof, and they've described me as the Mother Teresa of the Holocaust deniers and such. And so I sometimes am there at that property, and I don't live there all the time, but I go there from time to time, and so I made sure that I was in Germany, that there was no risk of my being held up in quarantine or lockdowns or something or other. So I was very much wishing to face the music, to as they say, dance on the wire, to see how much one could say without falling foul of the law, because it's very, very difficult for people to say anything at all that's contrary to what the Allies, who are still governing over Germany. And this, of course, would have been exposed in my trial. And it was this exposure, I think, for which my particular background lent a very potent sort of aspect that was perhaps not. It was more so in my case than most others, because of the background, as I've just described, of my late husband and my own personal sort of character, really, and history. It would have given a lot of credibility to, and would have embarrassed the Germans enormously worldwide and with their own people, to have it exposed that Germany, in fact, has no sovereignty over its own decisions. And Narat was pointing out to me that the Germans had to go to war, in these various countries, like all, along with the Allies, in Afghanistan and so on. And these things, really, the German people themselves, or their government, cannot decide for themselves, because they don't have sovereignty, because the war has not ended. The war, they did not have a peace settlement, and so it's Germany is in a very curious position politically. Not that, of course, we in our other countries don't have any what I'd call democracy, because we don't have any choice in those that we can elect. But in the case of Germany, they don't even have sovereignty of the normal sort. They are really literally under the thumb of the wartime Allies, and this would have been the most embarrassing thing that would have been exposed had the trial continued. And so the authorities backed down. They backed down. It's extraordinary. It's a first.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
So how do the Allies still exercise their control over Germany today?
Well, for instance, these, as Narat describes in the film that I have, he describes how they have had to comply with joining in with the Allies to go to war in Iraq, not in Iraq, in Afghanistan and various other places. It's supposed to be peace missions, but when Germans are killed, they're killed in these peace positions. They're obviously not peace missions, and the German authorities, the German government does not have a choice in it. They cannot ask their people, their civilians, citizens, whether they're willing to do this or not, because they have no sovereignty to decide this for themselves. And this would have been brought out and would have been sensational from the point of view of exposing these facts to both the Germans, who are not aware of it, and the international scene, for which Germany would then look very embarrassed. And it's interesting too that this was just prior to where we've seen just last Sunday, for the first time, the royal family have actually gone to Germany to participate in their national war commemoration in Berlin. And of course, it's interesting that may well have influenced my trial indirectly too, because it would have been a moment for them to bring out the idea that here are the Allies attending this war memorial, and one of the citizens of those Allies is currently in prison, which would have been me. And it would have just brought out too much embarrassment for the Germans internationally.
Right.
So it's quite a significant acquittal, and no deal was made. All I've had to do was pay the expense of the translator, but I've had no other expenses to pay for the trial itself. Of course, I have other expenses naturally, but not that. And so there was no deal made in that sense. The court and the prosecutors asked my attorney to ask me if I would be willing to lay down the case. Have you ever heard of such a thing? That the court and the prosecutor ask the so-called person, the person being charged with a very serious crime that has a very lengthy sentence.
I say, what would the sentence have been had it been imposed?
Well, at least 5 years, at least. I had been charged with querying the Holocaust. I had been charged with saying that there was only one Holocaust, and that was on the German civilians. This is a crime, and I had also said that the Germans were not exceptionally cruel for putting their fifth columnists, their jury, into concentration camps. This again is a crime to the value of 5 years and more, and they were very fearful of the proofs that I would have brought out to show that it was the leaders of world Jewry themselves who had indicted all Jews, regardless of whether the Jews wanted to or not. And there would have been many who were entirely innocent had no interest in being fifth columnists or anything else. But if your world leadership decides that, then you do become the fifth columnist. And that's the case with all other nations at war. And this is very probable. And there's a great deal of material that I have from the British Archive that would have been brought out, which would have embarrassed a great many people, and so that they saw that the case was unsafe from the point of view of those prosecutors, that they were at great risk of losing their case, and that I might be acquitted in a court, and this would have been.
Would there have been a jury in this trial, or would you have simply been tried before a judge?
A judge and two lay people is how they do it in Germany. And as we saw in the case of Alfred Schaefer and Monica, they in their trial in Munich, which I did cover from the Barnes Review, as a matter of fact, they were restricting people coming into the public gallery to even hear it. Sometimes people weren't allowed to bring in pencils. They weren't allowed to write down what Alfred said. And because the public hearing what he had to say would sort of corrupt them, you see. We're living in a crazy world.
Yeah. So would you advise people who maybe, shall we say, are not exactly politically correct to just stay out of Germany?
Well, you run a very great risk if you are overheard saying anything there. Yes. It's not just in Germany, of course. It's in I think 18 countries now, including Israel. The late great Professor Robert Forisson asked me to be his sole defense witness in Paris last year, or the year before now, because he and I both spoke at the Tehran conference in 2006, which was the only time that we've had any real democracy and freedom of debate. We had it in Iran in 2006, of the debate, as it were, were invited there to give their papers, and Robert had called me to be his defense witness because he was up before the French law in Paris for the fact that French people may have been able to hear his speech if it had been broadcast in France. And so I was able to first of all congratulate his lawyer for his bravery, just as I do with Nara and other lawyers in Germany who will take on cases that are Hollywood related and history related, World War II history related, because they run a risk of being prosecuted themselves if they look like they defend their clients. Literally. That is what the judge did in Manheim. I heard him. I witnessed it. So they are brave, these lawyers who will take on these cases.
And that is the end of our interview with Lady Michelle. Unfortunately, my computer just decided that it was going to do a reboot. And so we ended up missing what would have been probably about the last maybe 90 seconds of the interview. As you see, we've run out of time anyways. But I do want to thank Lady Michelle for being our guest today on TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour. It was great to be able to talk to her again, and I also would like to thank you for listening. Same time, same place next week. Come back. We'll do it again. Until then, if you happen to be listening on YouTube, please click like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Also, in the meantime, between now and next week, go to www.barnesreview.org, www.barnesreview.org. Find out how you can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review magazine. We need an advertiser for next year, 2021, right here on this broadcast, and we would like to offer you something special to be your inducement to do so. So if you will reach out to me by email, and my email address is director@dixieheritage.net, director@dixieheritage.net. Say, hey, Dr. Ed, how do I advertise on your TBR radio show? And also, between this broadcast and our next one will be Thanksgiving. So I want to wish all of our listeners in the United States a very happy Thanksgiving. And even though I know the government in several places would like to cancel Thanksgiving, I hope that you'll take the time to get with your friends and family. And, you know, we cannot let the left shut down all of our cultural institutions and all of our traditions. And so I wish each and every one of you a happy Thanksgiving with your friends, with your loved ones. God bless.